The Arizona mountains had always stood like silent sentinels. Above the frontier town blue in the distance, jagged as old bones, and rumored to hold secrets older than every name carved into their red stone. Folks in town spoke of them in half-whispers, calling them dangerous, untamed, a place where only outlaws, spirits, and desperate souls dared to wander. Ella Sinclair became one of those souls on a night when the moon hid behind a ragged veil of clouds. The little schoolhouse she once filled with chalk dust and laughter had grown too small to protect her. The streets she'd walked every morning now carried the echo of boots following too close behind her. And the eyes, Lord, those eyes belonging to Silas Brandt, the wealthiest cattleman in the county, watched her with a hunger that turned her blood cold. It started harmless enough, a compliment, then flowers, then expensive gifts she tried to refuse. Silas didn't take refusal kindly. The man had a grin that fooled strangers and a temper folks feared too much to speak of. The sheriff himself, a man supposed to uphold the law, had muttered, "You'd best not make an enemy of Silas." Miss Sinclair, when she tried to file a complaint. So, when Silas's threats grew unmistakable when he cornered her behind the stable and told her that no woman denied him twice, Ella understood two things clearly. Silas Brandt would not stop, and no one in town would stop him. So she gathered what little courage she had left and packed a bag before the sun rose. A loaf of bread, some jerky, a spare dress, her father's hunting knife, the quilt her mother stitched before she died. Everything else she left behind: her teaching books, her keepsakes, her small trunk of belongings. None of it mattered more than her life. Under cover of darkness, she saddled her mare, Whisper, a gentle gray with more loyalty than most men. Ella stroked her neck, whispering, "It's time to go, girl." The mare seemed to understand, because she didn't make a sound as they slipped out of town. Ella didn't cry. There was no room for tears when her heart was pounding as if the devil himself was on her heels. She rode for hours, letting the desert wind dry the sweat on her skin, letting the stars guide her, letting the mountains rise higher and higher until they swallowed the horizon. The further she rode, the lighter she felt, fear giving way to an ache that felt dangerously close to hope. At dawn, she reached the foothills. The air grew cooler, pine replaced sagebrush, and as the sun climbed, she found what she had been searching for, an old hunter's cabin she had seen only once years ago, when her father took her on a mountain trail ride. Back then it had been a ruin. Now it looked even worse, stilted, half-rotten, as if a strong wind could send it sliding down the ridge. But to Ella, it was a sanctuary. She spent her first days repairing it. Moss filled the cracks, dust settled thick as flour. The hearth was clogged with old soot. Yet she worked with steady hands, her muscles screaming, her back aching, but her heart beating more calmly than it had in years. Up in the mountains, no one knew her name. No one demanded her smile. No one hunted her like a prize to be owned. She slept with her knife under her pillow. But each morning she woke to birdsong instead of threats. She learned how to set traps, collect herbs, patch worn clothes. Whisper grazed freely in the clearing, her coat shining under the sun. Ella breathed deeper, slept easier, laughed for the first time in months when a curious squirrel stole a piece of her bread. Slowly, Ella transformed from a frightened schoolteacher into a woman shaped by wind, pine, and solitude. But mountain peace is a fragile thing. The storms rolled in without warning during late autumn fast. Furious, hungry storms that rained fire and tore through the canyons like beasts. Ella had weathered a few from inside her cabin, clutching a blanket around her shoulders as lightning split the sky. But nothing compared to the storm that rose one fateful night. It hit like a war drum. Winds howled through the trees with a voice that shook the rafters. Rain hammered the roof so hard Ella feared it would collapse. Whisper, tied in the small lean-to stable, whinnied in panic. Ella fed the fire, tightened the wooden bar on the door, and tried to steady herself. She'd grown brave living alone. Yes, but this storm felt angry, almost alive, as though the mountains themselves were warning her she wasn't as safe as she believed. She wrapped her quilt around her shoulders, reading to distract herself, but the roar outside drowned out every thought. She tried sewing, but her hands shook, so she sat by the fire, knees hugged to her chest. listening to the storm rage like it wanted to swallow her whole. Then came boom, 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 a knock. Thunder rumbled a heartbeat later, but there was no mistaking it. Some man was outside her door. Ella froze, breath trapped in her chest. No one should be on this mountain in weather like this. No cowboy, no hunter. And if God forbid Silas had somehow tracked her here. The knocking came again. Harder, more urgent. She grabbed her knife. Her heart thundered louder than the storm. "Who's there?" she called, voice trembling. Silence. Then a deep, steady voice, calm even amidst the chaos. "I seek shelter. The storm is too strong." A stranger, a man. His accent was unfamiliar, smooth and rhythmic, like the rolling of distant drums. Ella hesitated. Fear clawed up her spine, whispering all the ways this could be a trap. But another voice whispered to the voice that remembered what desperation felt like, what it meant to have nowhere else to go. She lifted the bar and opened the door just an inch. Wind tried to rip it from her hands. Rain soaked her instantly. Lightning flashed tan. She saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a buffalo hide cloak dripping with rain. Long dark hair plastered against his face. Copper-toned skin. A beaded necklace resting against a chest built by strength, not luxury. His eyes black as obsidian met hers with a steady calm that didn't match the storm. Apache. Not just any Apache. Everything about him screamed authority and exhaustion. Ella's breath caught. The stranger swayed on his feet, his cloak torn at the shoulder, blood mixing with rain, dripping down his arm. He had been injured. Badly. Fear turned to instinct. She stepped back. "Come inside." He entered silently, yet somehow filled the entire cabin with his presence. As Ella shut the door, the storm roared harder outside, but inside, another storm had begun, one that would shape the rest of her life. The stranger stood just inside the doorway, water dripping from his cloak and forming a dark pool on Ella's wooden floor. The firelight flickered across his face, carving shadows that made him look both fierce and impossibly exhausted. The storm roared outside, but inside the cabin, a heavy silence hung between them. He swayed again. Ella dropped her knife without thinking. "Sit down before you fall," she said, guiding him toward the only chair strong enough to hold a man of his build. He didn't resist, just lowered himself slowly, carefully, like a warrior who refused to show weakness even when his body demanded it. Up close, Ella could see the wound clearly, a deep gash across his upper arm, the edges angry and swollen. Blood leaked steadily, mixed with rainwater. She swallowed hard. "You're hurt." He met her eyes. His gaze was steady, steady in a way that made her heart beat too fast. "It will mend," he said simply. The storm made the path hard to cross. Ella blinked at the understatement. "Hard to cross? In this weather, it's a miracle you're alive." His lips twitched as if he found her words amusing, but the pain in his eyes betrayed him. Ella forced herself to move, to think. She tossed more wood on the fire, then grabbed her small medicine tin, one of the few precious things she'd brought from town. "Clean cloth, spirits, needles. Take off your cloak," she said softly. "And your shirt." He hesitated a breath, then began peeling off the soaked layers. The cloak fell to the floor with a heavy thud, followed by a leather vest and a shirt ripped nearly in half. When he exposed the wound fully, Ella sucked in a sharp breath. "Good Lord," she whispered. "This needed tending hours ago." He shrugged. There were other matters. Ella didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, she moved closer and cleaned the wound with gentle but firm hands. He didn't flinch, not once. The only sign of pain was the tightening of his jaw. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He watched her for a long moment before answering. "Dakota." His voice was rich, deep, rolling through the small cabin like distant thunder. "And you?" he asked. "Ella," she replied, her voice softer than she meant it to be. When she touched the wound again, his muscles flexed under her fingers, strong, hardened by a life far different from hers. She felt the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his breath, and something unspoken passed between them, something neither could name. "You traveled alone?" he asked. Ella's hands paused for a second. She didn't know him. She owed him nothing. But his eyes held no deceit, only quiet curiosity, only honesty. "Yes," she said finally. For a while now, he didn't press her. Instead, he nodded as if he understood more than she said. When she finished stitching the wound, she wrapped his arm in clean cloth and stepped back. "You need rest," she said. Dakota's gaze swept the cabin. One bed, one chair, a small cooking table, and a hearth. "Nothing more. I will sleep on the floor." Ella shook her head. "Not in your condition." "I am not helpless," he said calmly. "I didn't say you were," she replied. "But sleeping on the floor with that wound makes no sense." "You can take the bed." He raised a brow. "And where will you sleep?" "I've slept sitting up before," she muttered, though it wasn't exactly true. "The storm will pass by morning." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Maybe something more. "I will use the floor," he repeated, his voice final but not unkind. Ella knew better than to argue with a man who looked like he could command an army with one word. So she simply nodded. The hours crawled by as the storm battered the world outside. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Wind shrieked between the boards. Lightning flashed across the mountains, throwing long, sharp shadows that danced across Dakota's resting form on the floor. Ella sat near the fire, pretending to read but unable to focus. Her eyes kept drifting toward the man who lay half covered in her quilt. His breathing had steadied. His hair spread across the floor like spilled ink. He did not look dangerous now. He looked tired, human, but there was no mistaking the strength that lay under that stillness. Ella couldn't help studying him, the sharp line of his jaw, the broadness of his shoulders, the faint scars marking the life he'd lived long before he knocked on her door. She tried to tell herself she watched him out of caution, but the truth was harder to swallow. She felt strangely drawn to him. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, even wounded, even exhausted, like a man who bowed to no one. Maybe it was the quiet dignity that wrapped around him like a mantle. Maybe it was simply that he wasn't Silas Brandt. He wasn't a man who demanded or threatened or tried to own. He was something entirely different. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly the cabin shook. Ella jumped, clutching the book to her chest. Dakota opened his eyes instantly. "You are afraid," he said softly. "Just startled," she replied. Though her voice betrayed her, he pushed himself up on one elbow despite the pain. "The storm is loud, but it cannot harm you here." Ella swallowed. "Storms don't frighten me as much as the things that come with them." Dakota studied her, eyes dark and knowing. "You left something behind," he said. "Something dangerous." Ella stiffened. Her heart began to race. How could you know that?" "Your eyes carry a fear that did not come from rain or thunder," he replied. "You look like someone who has run far and still listens for footsteps behind her." Ella turned away quickly, the truth cutting to close. Dakota didn't push further. He simply said, "You are safe now." No one had spoken those words to her in years. Not once. Not even she had allowed herself to believe them. But from his lips, they didn't sound like empty comfort. They sounded like a promise. As midnight crept toward morning, the storm began to slow. The thunder softened. The rain thinned. The wind settled into a quieter whisper. Ella moved to check Dakota's bandage. But when she knelt beside him, he opened his eyes again, those obsidian black eyes locking onto hers in the flickering firelight. "You helped me when you had no reason to," he said quietly. "You knocked on my door in a storm." She murmured, "I couldn't turn you away." He studied her face for a long moment. "You are brave." Ella's breath caught. No one had ever called her that. People had called her stubborn, foolish, naive, but never brave. She opened her mouth to answer, but Dakota's voice softened even further. "Sleep now. I will keep watch." Her chest tightened. Something in her heart buried deep felt seen for the first time in a long while. She nodded, exhausted as the adrenaline faded. Curling up beside the hearth, she wrapped her quilt around herself. As she drifted into sleep, she heard the storm outside fade into a distant murmur, and somewhere in that quiet, with Dakota watching over her, Ella felt something she had not felt in months, maybe years. Safe. Morning crept slowly into the mountains, soft and pale, washing the cabin in thin strands of gold. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. The pines glittered with raindrops. The earth smelled fresh and rich, and the air held that quiet stillness that only follows a night of chaos. Inside the cabin, Ella stirred from sleep with a stiffness in her neck, but warmth in her chest. For the first time in months, her dreams had not been plagued by shadows or threats. Instead, she had slept deeply, wrapped in the comforting crackle of the dying fire, and with a man she barely knew keeping watch when she opened her eyes. Dakota was sitting near the window, his injured arm wrapped and secured against his side, his posture alert despite the obvious pain. He watched the forest with the stillness of a hawk. Ella pushed herself up slowly. "You didn't sleep." "I did," he replied calmly. Enough. He had not moved much. His blanket lay untouched, his hair still damp, and his expression unreadable. But his eyes softened, just slightly, when he saw she was awake. "Your arm. How does it feel?" she asked. "Better," he said. "Thanks to you." Ella flushed. Compliments from men in town had always felt hollow, coated in intentions she did not want to imagine. But from Dakota, the words felt simple, honest, earned. She stood, brushing her hair back with her fingers. "You should eat something." Dakota didn't argue. That alone startled her. Most men she'd known would refuse help out of sheer pride. But Dakota simply watched as she moved around the small cabin, gathering dried meat, cornmeal, and herbs she had collected. She cooked quietly, comforted by the routine, comforted even more by the weight of his gaze following her every step. But it wasn't a possessive gaze, nor a judging one. It was studying, observing, like he wanted to understand her. When the food was ready, she handed him a bowl. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment, and Ella felt a warm flutter ripple through her chest. Dakota noticed it too. He said nothing about it, only ate slowly, carefully. "Your cooking is good," he said. She laughed softly. "That's the kindest compliment I've received in a long time." He paused. "Do people not speak kindly to you?" Her smile faded. Dakota looked at her, truly looked at her, and the silence between them turned heavier, filled with questions, fears, and things neither of them knew how to voice. Finally, Ella took a slow breath. "People speak kindly, but kindness often has strings attached." Dakota's jaw tightened. "Such as the man you ran from." Ella's heart lurched. "I never told you there was a man. You did not have to," he said gently. "The way you listen for footsteps outside, the way you flinch at every branch tapping the window. I have seen fear like that before." Ella stopped breathing for a moment. Then she sank onto the small stool across from him. "His name is Silas Brandt," she said quietly. "He wouldn't leave me alone." Dakota's voice lowered. "He threatened you?" She nodded. "When I told him I wasn't interested, he said no woman refused him twice. And when I tried getting help, everyone was too scared of him." She swallowed hard. "So I left." Dakota said nothing for a long moment, but the air around him shifted, grew sharper. "He has much power?" he asked. "More than he deserves," Ella whispered. Dakota's expression didn't change, but something fierce flickered behind his eyes, a protective fire. A silent promise. Ella felt her chest tighten, not with fear now, but with something dangerously close to comfort. After they finished eating, Ella cleaned up while Dakota stood slowly, testing his strength. His wound pulled at him. She could see it in the way he exhaled through his nose, steady and controlled. "You should rest," she said firmly. He shook his head. "It is not in me to lie down while others work." Ella folded her arms. "And I don't need someone hurting themselves just to prove they're strong." Dakota met her gaze. For the first time since he'd arrived, something warm tugged at the corner of his mouth, half a smile, barely there, but real. "You are stubborn," he said. "I've had to be." His half-smile grew. "Good." The simple word good made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. By midday, the sun warmed the mountains, melting the frost and filling the clearing with a soft glow. Ella stepped outside to check the sky, feeling the wet earth squish under her boots. Dakota followed, slower, but with the silent grace of someone who blended into the land around him. The forest seemed to greet him. Birds settled on branches near him. A rabbit froze, studying him but not fleeing. Even the wind seemed to move gently around him, as though respecting his presence. "You know these mountains well?" Ella asked. Dakota nodded. "I was raised on lands like these. The mountains speak if you know how to listen." Ella tilted her head. "What are they saying now?" He closed his eyes briefly. "That the storm has passed, but another danger lingers." A shiver crawled up her spine. "You mean Silas?" Dakota didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ella stared at the mountains, hands tightening around her arms. I thought coming here would keep me hidden. You were wise to come, Dakota said. But men like him, they do not let go easily. Ella's breath trembled. You think he'll come looking for me? Dakota turned to her, his eyes steady and certain. If he does, he will not reach you. Something in the way he said it quiet, unshaken made Ella feel as though the ground beneath her feet had turned solid again. Strong. Safe. But then Dakota's expression shifted, growing thoughtful. I must return to my people soon, he said. They expect me. I did not mean to be caught in the storm. Ella's heart twisted at the thought of him leaving. She hadn't known him a full day, yet his presence filled the cabin, the clearing, her world. I understand, she said, though her voice cracked slightly. You've stayed longer than you intended. Dakota's eyes stayed on her face. Yes, he said softly, longer, and yet not long enough. Ella's breath caught. Not long enough. The words hung between them heavy, warm, full of meaning neither of them dared to acknowledge. Not yet. That afternoon, Dakota sat by the stream while Ella washed bandages and refilled her water pail. They spoke in gentle tones, trading pieces of their lives like fragile secrets. He told her of his people, how he'd been chosen as chief after years of guiding, protecting, fighting when necessary, how he valued peace far more than war. Though the world didn't often allow him such luxury, she told him about teaching children in town, how she loved their curiosity, how she used to dream of having her own family someday before fear pushed everything else aside. Dakota listened as though every word she spoke mattered, as though nothing in the world could distract him. Ella found herself smiling more than she had in months, laughing even, and every time she did, Dakota's eyes warmed, just barely, but enough to make her heart quicken. 2 worlds under one roof, 2 lives that should never have crossed, and yet, they had died as the sun dipped low and the sky blushed gold. Dakota stood. I must go tomorrow, he said quietly. My people will worry. Ella swallowed hard. I know. He stepped closer, close enough that Ella could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough to see the flecks of fire reflected in his dark eyes. But tonight, he said softly, I will stay. Ella couldn't look away, couldn't breathe. For tonight, she whispered, I'm glad. And as dusk settled around them, the fragile thread between them woven in a single stormy night grew stronger, deeper, impossible to ignore. The sun slipped behind the jagged peaks like a tired outlaw, dragging long shadows across the valley where Ella's cabin stood. The sky glowed the color of rusted copper, streaked with the soft purples of coming night. Inside, a fire crackled warm and steady, and for the first time in months, Ella felt that rarest of things, a quiet evening that didn't hurt to breathe through. Across from her sat Chief Kale, the Apache warrior whose presence filled the single-room cabin like an entire frontier. He didn't sit as a man unsure of his place, no. Kale sat like someone who had earned every seat at any fire he chose. Ella had patched up the wound on his shoulder earlier that day, and she noticed how he rolled it gently, testing its strength. You heal fast, she said with a half-smile. Stirring the stew in the iron pot, Kel's eyes caught hers, dark, steady, full of that heat that made her breath hitch against her will. Not fast, he said softly, just stubborn. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't made in too long. Outside, the wind tugged at the cabin boards and whispered through the pine needles. But then another sound rose with it, a distant echo, a drum-like thud, rhythmic, growing. Ella froze. Kale tensed instantly, head lifting, shoulders straight, every muscle in him sharpened like a blade being drawn. What is it? She whispered. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the shuttered window, opening it just a crack. The last light of dusk washed across his face, outlining the strong cut of his jaw, the tension in his brow. He inhaled slowly. Horses, he murmured. Many. Her blood ran cold. Are they yours? She asked, already knowing the answer by the grim set of his mouth. No. Ella's knuckles tightened around the wooden spoon. She wasn't supposed to feel fear anymore, not after running from the people who had nearly taken her life. But fear had its own memory, and it stirred in her chest like an old injury. Kale shut the window with quiet precision and turned to her. You must stay inside. he said. Do not speak. Do not show yourself. She frowned. Cale, what's happening? His gaze held hers, steady as a mountain. Riders from your world. Her stomach twisted. Riders from her world meant only one thing. The men who had hunted her before. The ones she thought she'd escaped. She stepped closer to Cale. You can't fight them. Alone. His expression softened just a little, like her concern meant something he hadn't expected. I do not intend to fight unless I must. Thunder rolled across the valley, not from the sky, but from hooves pounding the earth. Pella's breath shivered in her chest. Cale moved toward the door. Ella, listen to me. Whatever happens, you stay behind the table. If they mean harm, I will lead them away. No. The word escaped her before she could stop it. Cale paused, surprised. I won't hide while you put yourself in danger because of me, she said. Her voice shook, but her resolve didn't. I won't let you fight for me alone. His eyes softened in that way that struck her straight in the ribs. You are stronger than you think, he said. But strength is knowing when to stay protected. She opened her mouth to argue, but it was too late. The hoof beats stopped outside the cabin. The night fell silent. Then a fist struck the door. Ella Marsh. A voice barked, come out. Her breath died in her throat. Cale turned toward her slowly. Stay here. Before she could speak, he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Ella moved to the window, heart pounding in her ears. She pushed the curtain aside, just enough to see. 4 men sat on horseback in a rough semicircle. Lantern light flickered off their rifles. The leader, hard-faced, red with alcohol, pointed his weapon straight at Cale. Well, I'll be damned. The man snarled. You're a long way from your tribe, aren't you? Cale didn't flinch. This is not your land. The man spat into the dirt. Everything in this territory is mine, if I want it to be. Ella felt heat rising in her throat. Fear and anger mixing until she could barely swallow. The man leaned forward on his saddle. We're looking for a runaway woman, a thief. Goes by Ella Marsh. Ella's blood froze. We know she's up here somewhere. He continued, and if you're hiding her, Chief, well, he grinned, showing broken teeth. That'd be a mighty bad choice. Cale spoke calmly. There's no woman here for you. The man cocked his rifle. Move aside. Cale didn't move. Tension crackled through the air like lightning trapped between storms. Ella couldn't stay hidden any longer. Not while Cale stood with a gun pointed at his chest because of her. She stepped toward the door, but just then, one of the riders lifted a torch. Look there, he said, pointing at Cale's bandaged shoulder. Bet she patched him up for something. I smell a story. Cale's jaw set. His voice dropped. Put the fire down, or what? The leader taunted. You'll attack for armed men? Cale didn't answer, but Ella saw the shift in his stance, the tightening of his hands, the promise of violence in the air. Before anything could happen, the man with the torch hurled it toward the cabin. Ella screamed. Cale lunged. The torch hit the outside wall, flames splashing upward like a wave of burning paint. No. Ella threw open the door and ran out before Cale could stop her. Stop, I'm right here. The men turned. Cale whipped around, fury blazing in his eyes. Ella, get back. But the leader only grinned wider. Well now, there she is. Ella stood shaking, her hands clenched. Leave him out of this. I'll go with you. You don't get to set terms, the man snapped. She belongs to no one, Cale roared. The force of it stunned the riders into silence. Cale stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. The firelight threw sharp lines of gold across his face, carving him into the image of a warrior carved from stone and storm. Lower your guns, Cale ordered, or you will face the Apache. The men hesitated. Flames rose behind Ella, licking up the side of her cabin. Smoke curled into the night. But something else rose too, something in her chest, something she had buried under months of fear. She took Cale's hand. It was the smallest movement, but the men saw it, and in their eyes flickered something between confusion and fear. The leader spat again, but now it was forced. This isn't over. He jerked his horse around. One by one, the riders followed, retreating into the shadows of the pines. Cale didn't move until the last hoofbeat faded into the distance. Only then did he exhale a deep, heavy breath that seemed to release the entire night. Ella turned to look at her cabin. The fire was climbing dangerously high. Cale didn't hesitate. He grabbed a bucket, sprinted to the well, and began tossing water at the flames. Ella joined him, choking on smoke and adrenaline. Together they battled the fire until it hissed itself out, leaving nothing but charred wood and the smell of burnt pine. Only when it was over did Cale turn to her. "You should not have come outside," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. She stepped closer. "I wasn't going to watch you die for me." Their breath mingled in the smoky air. Cale's eyes softened, warm and deep as the earth. "Ella, I will always protect you. But you must trust me when I say your life matters more than anything those men could ever take." Her throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered. The firelight flickered across his face. He lifted a hand, hesitated, and then brushed a strand of soot-streaked hair from her cheek. "Because," he said softly, "your heart has become part of mine." Ella felt the world tilt, not from fear, not from danger, but from something stronger, something that filled her chest like the first breath after drowning. Between them, in the smoky hush of the mountain night, the storm was no longer outside, that it was in her heartbeat, and in his. Morning came slow and pale, spilling across the mountains like soft gold brushed over old stone. Smoke still lingered faintly round the cabin, a thin reminder of the fire that nearly took everything. The air smelled of damp ash and pine needles, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried into the waking sky. Ella stood outside the cabin, arms wrapped around herself. The boards were scorched black along one wall, but the fire hadn't claimed the home. Cale had made sure of that. And now, he was nowhere in sight. The realization scraped at her chest. He had stayed with her through storms, through danger, through fire and fear. He had stood in front of rifles for her, spoken her name like it meant shelter instead of trouble. And yet this morning, she woke to find only the faint imprint of where he had sat beside her during the night. She felt hollow. She was not used to needing anyone, not after months of running, months of building walls out of fear and calluses. But Cale had stepped into her life like a knife carving through leather, clean, sure, unstoppable. Footsteps approached. Ella turned sharply. Cale emerged from the trees, carrying a water skin and a cloth bundle. His dark hair was damp from the river, and the early sun carved warm copper lines across his cheekbones. "You're awake," he said softly. She exhaled. Relief. It surprised her with how strong it was. "You left," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought," Cale's eyes narrowed slightly, "you thought I would disappear without word? That is not my way." She looked down, embarrassed. "You were gone. I went for herbs," he said. "Your hands are burned from the fire." Ella blinked. Only now did she notice the faint redness along her palms. Cale stepped closer and gently took one of her hands. His touch was warm, steady, reverent in a way that made her pulse flutter. He spread a cool salve across her skin, working with slow, deliberate care. "You should not have faced those men," he murmured. "Not alone." "I wasn't alone," she whispered. "You were there." He paused, thumb grazing the back of her hand. "Ella, what they said, what they tried to do, this is not something you can outrun forever." She swallowed hard. "I know. You fear going back." She nodded. "Because going back means living the life they tried to force on me." Cale's jaw tightened. "You will not return to chains." His certainty shook her. No one had ever spoken for her like that, not with truth in their voice, not with a promise carried like a blade. She felt herself leaning into him without meaning to. "Cale, what if they come back? Then I will face them again. And what if more follow?" His eyes softened in that deep, grounding way. "Then we face them together." Ella felt something open in her chest, something like breath, like sunlight pushing past a long winter. But fear was a stubborn thing. "What if you get hurt?" she whispered. Cale studied her, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in him, something raw beneath the warrior's strength. "Then I will heal," he said. "But losing you," his voice caught, "that is a wound that would not." Her breath trembled. "Cale." He looked away for a moment, toward the mountains stretching endless and quiet around them. "Ella Marsh, you came here seeking a place to hide. But mountains do not heal wounds. People do." She felt her heart thump painfully. "And who heals yours?" she asked. His gaze returned to hers, intense and unflinching. "You." The day passed in repairs. Cale climbed the roof to replace charred shingles, while Ella scrubbed soot from the window frames. They worked in quiet rhythm, the kind found between two people who no longer needed to speak to be understood. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in thick, silver-bottomed, heavy with rain. The air grew cool, the sky dim. Ella gathered firewood while Cale roasted venison over a small outdoor flame. Thunder murmured in the distance. Ella rested beside him on a fallen log. Storm's coming, Cale nodded. A gentle one. I like gentle storms, she said. He glanced at her. You've known too many violent ones. She didn't answer, not with words, but she shifted closer until their shoulders brushed. Cale went still. Ella, he said softly. What? But he didn't answer. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed it to his chest right over the steady, powerful beat of his heart. Feel this, he murmured. Every time it beats, it chooses to stay. Her breath caught. Stay. She whispered. With you. Her vision blurred for a moment, the weight of his words overwhelming in their honesty. Cale. She swallowed hard. What happens now? That depends on what you choose. She hesitated. Weeks ago, months ago, she would have said she wanted nothing but solitude, freedom from men, from danger, from the life that chased her. But now, she wanted peace. She wanted safety. She wanted warmth and breath and a future not shaped by fear. And she wanted Cale. He stood slowly, offering his hand. Walk with me. She took it without hesitation. They walked toward the ridge overlooking the valley. The wind tugged at Ella's hair, carrying the smell of rain and pine. From the ridge, she could see far rolling hills, dark forests, winding streams. This was the place she had chosen to survive. But now, maybe it was the place she could choose to live. Cale stopped at the highest point. This land has been my home since I was a child, he said. But I have wandered many trails. I will wander again. I will not ask you to abandon the place you fought so hard to reach. She looked at him. I didn't fight for the land. Thunder cracked softly overhead. Cale met her eyes, something fragile and hopeful flickering there. Then what did you fight for? Ella stepped closer until her chest brushed his. You, she whispered. Rain began to fall soft, cool drops tapping against their skin. Cale cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks with a tenderness that made her knees weaken. Ella Marsh, he breathed. I would cross every mountain, every storm, every danger to keep your heart safe. Her own heart answered before she could think, leaning into him. Lifting toward him, Cale lowered his forehead to hers, breath mingling with hers. Are you sure? He whispered. This path, it is not a gentle one. I don't need gentle, she said. I need true. His breath hitched, and then Cale kissed her. It was not a sudden kiss, not hurried or desperate. It was slow, deep, filled with the kind of certainty only found after surviving fire and danger and fear together. The rain fell harder, soaking them, running down their hair and clothes. But neither moved. The storm might as well have circled around them instead of touching them. When they finally parted, Ella rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath her ear. What happens now? She whispered. Cale wrapped an arm around her shoulders, protective and sure. Now, he said softly, we build the life you were meant for, not the one you fled. Ella closed her eyes, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. She wasn't running. She had found a place to stand, a heart to trust, a future to face without fear. And as the rain washed the ash from the cabin roof, Ella knew she had escaped to the mountains. But in Cale, she had found the reason to stay.